So how do we make things safer for cyclists? Well, it's said that other parts of Europe are better in terms of improving their roads and things. Ceri Woolsgrove is a Brit in cycling-mad Belgium and works for the European Cyclist Federation. He told me a bit earlier on why some countries are already streets ahead.
Well, you can go to the major cycling countries. You have the Dutch and the Danes. You have just some German cities, some Swedish cities. The main rule of thumb, I would say, is that you have to, where there is motorised transport over 30 kph and in high volumes, then you need to separate, and then you need to provide decent infrastructure. It all depends on your city. So you'll have some cities are smaller roads and higher volumes. Some will have broader roads and newer roads and straighter roads. So it depends on the city as well.
I've cycled in Belgium myself, and it seems that the drivers are happy to give people on bicycles the right of way. Is that something that Britain can learn from?
I think so, yeah. I think in many of these countries, you have a culture towards cyclists and cycling which is slightly different. And to create this sort of culture, you have to be doing little things like where there's strict liability, for example, around most of Europe. I think there's only about 4 countries, of which the UK is one, where you do not have strict liability, whereby the motorist is deemed to be guilty for damages, not criminal guilt, but for damages, where there's been an accident between a larger vehicle and a cyclist. Car drivers are seen as privileged to be allowed to use 1.5 ton, 200 horsepower machines on the road, and so they have to take responsibility for them. And that's seen as more important over in many of these countries over here in Europe.
Let's talk about not so much the responsibility of drivers now, but the responsibility of cyclists. With more and more cyclists on the road in the UK, surely a lot of responsibility lies with them in how they cycle.
Yes and no, to a certain extent. I mean, firstly, they've taken the decision to move away from those larger vehicles. They've taken the decision to commit to an environmentally friendly form of transport. Of course, education and training for cyclists is important. There's always, at some stage, cyclists will have to use the roads. There's not going to be infrastructure everywhere. So training and education is also a part of that. But we have to put it in perspective and see where the actual risks are coming from.
Just one final question, Ceri. Inevitably, there are groups on both sides that see the opposite as the enemy. Cyclists who see cars as the enemy and drivers who think cyclists are the enemy. Is that unique to the UK, or does that occur in other parts of the European Union?
It does seem reasonably strong in the UK for some reason. I don't know why but that's the case. I think as you get more cyclists, that will become less and less as cyclists become less of a minority and more of a majority. I really couldn't tell you why there is such an aggression in the UK against cyclists. I know there is a car culture in the UK, but I think it's part to do with the psychology against the minority.
Ceri, thank you so much for joining us. Safe cycling.
Thank you, Andrew. Goodbye.